Hi, my name's Mark and welcome to the channel. Today we're going to visit Sleeve Island, look at a couple of knitting and crochet fails, and explore all of my works in progress or unfinished works from 2023. Let's go. Alright, I've dreaded making this video because I don't really like to focus on my works in progress or abandoned works in progress. So this video feels a little bit like I'm in therapy or I'm going to the doctor and I'm ready for them to tell me everything that's wrong with me. So to shake that, I'm going to look first at the things I did complete last year. This was my video I posted last week. I made several sweaters, wraps, hats, and a couple Christmas stockings, and the deadlines I gave myself last year were pretty strict. I called it the year of sweaters. I was trying to do a sweater every month, and I pushed that even further, trying to complete my sweaters in 2 weeks, which sometimes, no problem. If the project moved on more quickly or if I had more free time, I could do that without issue. Other times, life got in the way, or I just got bored of working on projects or maybe needed a break from my crafting. So that left me with some projects that I never finished, and I don't know, I always have a sort of rain cloud over my head, that pressure of, you didn't finish this, and perhaps it feels like a failure for some reason. I know that's not what it is, but today I'm facing that head on as we look at these works in progress. Let's start out with Dorothy the Mouse by Louise Crowther. This pattern comes from the book Knitted Animal Friends, which is a really beautiful collection of stuffed animals that you knit, and all of the animals have suggested or recommended outfits with the patterns included as well. I think these are really beautiful patterns. I've had a lot of friends and colleagues make them, but for me, it wasn't such an enjoyable experience. First, these patterns are worked flat, meaning you're turning your work and having the right side worked, followed by the wrong side, back and forth, instead of making pieces in the round. If possible, I always enjoy working in the round more than working flat. For one reason, you already have the pieces complete if you're working them in the round, where here, the flat pieces have to be mattress stitched together, which I find pretty tedious. So as I was seaming up my pieces, I wasn't doing the best job. I was growing really impatient, so I felt like my finished result looked pretty messy. This also was my first experience making a stuffed animal of any type. In hindsight, I would have stuffed her a little bit more. And as you can see, she's incomplete. She's missing one ear. I think that I've completed knitting all of the pieces. I just need to add them to her body, finish all of my seaming, and add the final details like the face. Unfortunately, this has become an abandoned work in progress, but maybe I'll finish it one day. Next up is a sweater. This is Arctic Spring by the Petite Knitter. I really love the look of this pattern, and I don't think I had any issues working the pattern. I think it was written well, the instructions were clear. The reason this ended up as a work in progress for me, there are two issues. The first was my tension, just the result of my own technique with the color work. I'm not sure if you can see the puckering here, and as I was working, I was really trying to gauge, are my floats loose enough? Am I leaving enough slack to later block this out? And the answer is no. My floats were a little bit too tight. I blocked the top of the sweater just to check, because sometimes things do work out with blocking, but the puckering was still noticeable. I don't think it's noticeable from this distance, but looking at it up close, if I were to wear it, it would bother me enough that I ended up putting this project on hold. So as you can see, it's just missing one sleeve. I could knock out that sleeve in a day, and I have enough yarn to finish it. I just don't think I'm convinced that I would be happy with the finished product. So, one difficulty with this work in progress is that I used mohair held with wool. So this entire work is going to be really tricky or maybe impossible to frog and pull back. So for now, it's living in this state. I've thought about potentially steeking it up the middle, cutting the sweater open, and adding a zipper so it's more like a little jacket, a little cardigan, and maybe having it over something else, having a different shirt or pattern breaking up this sweater would distract from the puckering, at least enough where I would be happy with the result. Because I used that mohair, this is a really heavy sweater. It's really warm, so I think it would work pretty well as a jacket. So at some point, I might finish that second sleeve and then figure out if I'm ready to steek it, attempt adding a zipper, and then I would be able to wear it and use it. Otherwise, I just don't see myself wearing it in its current state as a pullover sweater. You can see some of my color work here. Some of the floats look like they were generous enough, but this was fairly early on in my colorwork sweater journey, so I didn't really understand how much slack I needed to leave with my floats and carries. I've done several colorwork projects since, and I've been pretty happy with the results of those. I think I've figured out my tension. I've gotten a feel for how much I need to leave so that things can block out and we won't have any puckering or any issues with the tension or the look of the final pattern. Again, that's Arctic Spring by the Petite Knitter. Next up in my works in progress is the Field Cardigan from Camilla Vad. If you saw my finished objects video or some of my other videos I've posted on the channel, you'll know that I have a field sweater, the pullover version of this pattern. I really love the look of the pattern, of the garment when it's finished. Couple tricky things in the pattern, but since I'd already worked the pullover version, I was confident with the stitch and I thought, maybe I'll do a cardigan. So I ended up purchasing a sweater quantity of alpaca. This is 100% alpaca and it's natural in shade. It hasn't been dyed. So I picked up that yarn from Amano. It's called Eco Puna. And once I had that yarn, I thought this would be a beautiful way to use it. So a couple things about the pattern and how I've adapted it. As previously mentioned, I really don't enjoy working flat, a right side and then turning for the wrong side. And for this pattern, since I was familiar with the grain stitch in the round from the pullover, I really didn't want to change that by working a right side and wrong side of the stitch. So the cardigan pattern instructs to work it flat, but instead I've worked it in the round with a set of steek stitches. So when this garment is totally finished, I will steek it. I will reinforce that panel and then cut the sweater open and pick up stitches for my button band. This sweater is almost finished, it just needs sleeves. The next pattern in my works in progress pile is Mosquito Creek Cardigan. I started this sweater last calendar year and I was attempting to use stash yarn. This yarn is a tweed wool that I had purchased from Knit Picks, and the yarn was advertised as a worsted weight. However, when I received the yarn, I felt that it was really light for a worsted, and it wasn't going to work for the original pattern I had chosen. So this yarn sat in my stash for a while, and then eventually I looked for a DK weight pattern that I could use the yarn for. This sweater is worked flat in pieces. Again, something I don't love to do, but I did it. I love cables. I like the look of the sweater. However, once I started to work the pattern out of this yarn, as you can see, it loses a lot of definition. I think the stockinette portion on the edge of the sweater looks great. The cables look nice up close, but from any sort of distance, they lose their clarity, they lose their definition completely. So I was a little discouraged by that, and I was also a little discouraged by how this wool behaved. I'm a big believer in blocking, and when I finish an object, I'm always excited to block it, to even out my stitches, to really set the shape and dimensions I need, and to see the pattern become more defined. So these pieces have all been blocked, and I've joined some of them. I've done all but the final sleeve and the collar on this sweater. I was just disappointed with it. The pattern was fine. I liked it more on paper than with the finished object here, or almost finished object. So I decided in the end, I don't want to finish it, I don't want to wear it, and I don't really want to give it to anyone. I'm not proud enough of it for it to be a useful, thoughtful gift. So I'm not sure what will happen. I might abandon it. I might repurpose the pieces. I recently saw someone at a fiber festival with a really beautiful bag, and I stopped them and asked about the bag. Did you make this yourself? Did you follow a pattern? How did you make this? And they said that they repurposed a men's sweater. So they took the back panel of a beautifully knit, I think it was color work, it might have been cables, a beautifully knit sweater, and then they reinforced it and turned it into a bag. They sewed it all together and then added lining and added leather straps. And it was really impressive. So potentially I would do some sort of project like that, making a bag, maybe making a pillowcase where I can repurpose the large panels of this project. I don't want it to go to waste, but again, I don't see myself finishing the project as is. Just a quick interruption to say that if you're new to the channel, I'd really appreciate you taking the time to subscribe so you're notified about future videos on the channel. If you're new or old, I'd love to hear from you. How many works in progress do you have lingering from 2023? Let me know in the comments below, and enjoy the rest of my unfinished projects. Next up, we have a couple of weekenders. If you watched my finished objects video, you'll know that my first sweater of 2023 was the Weekender from Andrea Mowry, and I chose to do that out of Malabrigo Rios. I was really happy with my resulting sweater. I loved the feel of it. I liked how the colors pooled. So when I saw another shade of Rios come into my local shop, I was tempted to get it to make a second Weekender for myself. If you've knit the Weekender, you're familiar with the general technique that you're working the sweater inside out. So the finished garment shows reverse stockinette as the main texture, but it's nice that Andrea Mowry lets us knit it inside out, so we're really knitting almost every stitch of the sweater and then using slip stitches to create the faux seam up the front and the back. So I find this to be a really quick knit. I knit the body of this sweater in maybe 4 or 5 days, and then it usually takes me a day per sleeve. So I thought I could knock it out in a week, and I was on my way to do that, and then I'll show you what stopped me in just a moment. So the body of the sweater I think is really pretty. I think the colorway is pretty moody. I like the sort of jewel tone element. Again, I liked the pattern. I liked the first one I had made, so I thought I'll make a second. And this Weekender is drastically different in color from my first version, so I thought this would be a nice addition to my wardrobe. So what made me put the project on hold? When it was time for the sleeves, I picked up my stitches and started working, and then quickly realized that the color was pooling in a really unsatisfactory manner. So here's one side of the sleeve. I think this is pleasant. It matches the general scheme of colors in the sweater, in the body of the sweater. But then when I flip that over, here we have very different color pooling. On this side of the sleeve, I'm hit right in the face with green. Green, yellow, it gets muddy, and I really don't like it. I think if the whole sweater looked like this, fine, but the body of the sweater gives me the impression of blues and reds, where this is all green pulling at the same time. So when I flip the sleeve from one side to the other, you'll really see the difference. You can see the difference there from the body to the sleeve. And then here's one side of the sleeve. And when I flip that, it's like night and day. There's a little bit of the green that you can see on both sides, but the overall impression is sort of blue on one side, green on the other. And it was driving me crazy. I don't want one side of the sweater to show one color and the other to show a different color. So I paused. I just have the sleeves remaining. I have enough yarn to finish the project, so the only thing stopping me is fear of color pooling. I'm not sure if I'll need to snip some of the green sections out of the yarn or start the yarn in a different place and maybe it'll work out better. So I have to troubleshoot that and then hopefully tackle those sleeves to finish that weekender. So the next work in progress is a weekender. This is not deja vu. This is another weekender. As I mentioned, I found the weekender to be a really straightforward, quick knit. So after I finished mine, I thought, this is the sort of sweater I would make as a gift for a knit-worthy individual in my life, whether that's a partner, a best friend. So this weekender is slated to go to my husband. I have most of the body finished, but that's where I paused. So you can see here it's in a variegated green. This yarn is from Fiber Spates. It's their Vivacious DK, which is a very heavy DK, so heavy that I think it acts as a worsted weight yarn. So I decided to use it for this weekender. Everything with this sweater was going pretty well. And then when I tried it on my husband, it was way too short. And he's not tall. He's on the shorter side. And sorry, I know he won't like me saying that, but I am much taller than he is. I should say it that way. So my weekender, when I made it, I followed the dimensions recommended in the pattern, and there was plenty of length, especially with a superwash yarn. I felt that it grew plenty. So when I tried his sweater on him, I was really surprised that it didn't have quite enough length. So that's the only issue there. I just need to pick up my stitches, measure him again, get the length of the body right, and then I'll take a couple days to finish those sleeves. I've never been a real believer in sleeve island, the concept of being stuck, finishing a project where you just need sleeves. But here I am, guilty, caught red-handed with 3 sweaters now, maybe more, that all need sleeves. Also, to my husband, I know you'll watch this eventually, I'm very sorry that I said you're short. My next work in progress is the Tobago Bag by Tony Lipsey. This is an interesting work in progress. Do you ever find yourself really bored of everything you're working on? You just don't have any motivation to touch any of the beautiful things you're currently crafting. So you think, I'll start something completely different. That's what I did in this situation. A good friend of mine had a lot of spare cotton, and so she lent me yarn, gave me yarn, and I thought, I'll start this pattern. I did that much of it, and I never touched it again. Maybe I'll finish it when summer comes. Next up, another sort of pathetic attempt at a project. A sock. If you know me in real life, I often say that I don't believe in hand knitting socks, which is my very lazy way of saying I don't want to spend my time, my tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of stitches on a sock. I think hand knit socks are beautiful, and I really like to buy hand knit socks that someone else has made. But I don't want to spend my thousands of stitches on socks, for whatever reason. Whenever I think I want to make a sock, I start it, I make one sock, I never make the second, or I give up halfway through a sock, like I did in this case. I've made socks before. I think I have 5 or 6 pairs that I've knit myself. I wanted to learn how the technique works, and I think it's like magic. It's pretty fun, but for whatever reason, I usually give up on socks. Next up, a very wimpy attempt at a project. This is a single granny hexie, like a granny square but a hexagon, for an eventual blanket that I would like to make. I think I made about 60 of these hexagons, but the gauge, my tension, the hook size I was using, it wasn't adding up. So I have the yarn for the project. I think I want to work on it eventually, but I need to swatch a bit more, figure out a better gauge, and then dive into the project. Another crochet project. This was a really enjoyable project to work on. Shoop the African flower sheep, Shoop the Sheep. And I have a video on the channel where I show the joining technique that the designer Hygge Bears uses. I had a lot of fun making these grannies, and I really like the colorway I used, the combination of colors I used. And I've joined most of the body of the sheep. All that's left is to finish joining the top tiles and then form the head and stuff and seam the final portion of this amigurumi granny square hexie situation. So I've done most of the work here. All of my pieces are finished. I just need to join the rest, stuff the sheep, and do final details like adding the eyes, the mouth, the nose, and the tail, which I think I'll do in time. I think I've said on the channel before, I love to knit and I like to crochet. I grew up crocheting, but only learned to knit about 6 years ago. And for whatever reason, I'm drawn to the motion of knitting, and I really like the fabric I can make from knitting. So I spend probably 95% of my time knitting and 5% crocheting. So by default, just a result of my habit of what I like to do with my crafting time, this crochet project has taken a lot longer to finish than I would like. But it lives in this little pouch with the right-sized hook, with all of the pieces, so that I am set up for success when I decide to finish it. All right, I think we're at the final work in progress, carrying over from 2023. This is another sweater from the petite knitter, Foxtales. I'd seen this sweater, not in person, but I've seen the pattern on Ravelry several times. I think I've seen pictures of long-distance friends who've made the sweater, and I really like the pattern, and it's something that I hope I finish knitting one day. This was another project that I started when I was bored with my other projects, so I got all of the yarn I needed, I put it all in my cute bag, I was ready to start, and you can see I cast on the yoke, and I've done, 12 rows of it, maybe that's 12, 16 rows, something like that. And I stopped when I got to the 3-color color work, just because if you're a color work person, you know having 3 colors going on at once is a very different beast than 2 colors at a time. I think I was playing around with the slip stitch method where you only work 2 colors at a time and you slip all of the stitches that require the 3rd color, and on the next round you work that 3rd color. Either way, this is something that I picked up and started around the holidays in December, and because of my busy schedule, because of my traveling, it went to the back burner. I opted to pick up projects that were further in progress and were a little bit easier for me to take on the road, to pick up when I was with family, so it got totally neglected. So that's my final work in progress from 2023. That's a wrap. Thanks so much for sticking around to the end of today's video. I hope that you felt some solidarity with me and my unfinished projects. Again, I'd love to hear from you in the comments what you're working on, how many works in progress you have from last year, and what your knitting, crochet, crafting goals are for this year. Thanks so much for spending some time with me on the channel. Happy knitting, happy crocheting, and I'll see you in the next one.